They have been really successful, and I'm really excited about today's session, where we are going to focus on the arts, heritage and culture industry and how it is managing to recover. I know lots of people are having a hard time, but this is an industry that's having a particularly difficult time. We are going to, we've got some people still to come in, so Sarah will just let them come in as we go through. We are going to record the session, so if anybody has any objections, and I'll mention that again in a moment when everyone's in, please let us know. But we do record the session and then put it on our website afterwards, so that you can watch, or if you have colleagues who've missed it and want to watch again. So I'm really pleased to welcome today Christina Broughton and Laura Kriefman. Christina is Partnerships Manager for Wessex Museums Trust, who run or oversee the 4 museums that tell the story of Wessex, so Dorset, Poole, Salisbury and Wiltshire. And Laura is the Chief Executive of the Barbican Theatre in Plymouth, which is a charity-run theatre. She'll tell you more, but they've spent the last 40 years working with young people, 12 to 25-year-olds, inspiring the next generation of artists, performing artists. And I actually met Laura on a networking call, and she was 4 days into the role when lockdown happened. So I'm sure she's going to tell us just how dramatic that was, suddenly being in charge of a theatre that was locked down and with no sense of when it might reopen. So how are we doing, Sarah, for people coming in? Are there still people coming in?
At the moment we've got 16, so I'll continue to let them in as people arrive.
Great. So for anyone who just missed it, we are recording, so please flag up at some point afterwards if you're not happy with that, and we won't put it on our website. We're going to take questions in the chat box, so Christina and Laura will talk for about 25 minutes or so between them. If you want to put questions in the chat box as we go, that's absolutely fine. Save them up to the end. We might bundle some of the questions up depending on the subject matter. So please feel free to put those questions in as we go along, and then we'll break, like I say, for after about 25 minutes, and we can have an informal question and answer session. So Christina, could I hand over to you, please?
Sure, thanks very much, and thank you for inviting me to talk to you all about Wessex Museums and the experience of our museums. Sarah, if I ask you just to forward the slide there for me, please. So just to give you a bit of information about Wessex Museums Trust, we don't run the 4 museums. I think I'll just say that first of all, but we're a charity established to support and enhance the work of our partner museums and others across Dorset and Wiltshire. And you can see some of the ways we do that here on the slide. I mean, the majority of our work as a consortium is centred around our Arts Council National Portfolio Organisation programme, which is all about things we do together as a consortium and that funding. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is about how Wessex Museums has really worked to support those individual museums during lockdown and since their reopening. Next slide, please, Sarah. So this is just a quick snapshot of our lovely museums. So as Karen said, it's Dorset Museum, Poole Museum, Salisbury Museum and Wiltshire Museum. And our museums are a similar size, and their collections cover similar areas. So they all tell the story of the region, and they include designated collections in archaeology, the work of significant artists and writers who lived and worked in the region, maritime archaeology, folklore, and the region's links to global communities and cultures. So we've got quite similar bits in our collections. Thank you. Oh, there we are. You can go on to the lockdown slide. I'll just move on to what happened to us, to our museums in lockdown. Well, certainly on the 17th of March, like many other businesses, we went from these vibrant, busy social spaces to pretty much empty buildings. And that picture at the top is Salisbury Museum empty in the middle of the day. So 3 of our museums closed their doors, and the 4th, which is Dorset Museum, is currently undergoing a £12 million capital redevelopment. So basically their construction site closed, which has been a big setback for them. The majority of the museum staff were furloughed, with the exception of staff at Poole Museum, who are local authority employees. But a lot of them were redeployed to work on the COVID-19 effort. So they were answering helplines and all sorts of things. And the other staff that weren't furloughed were publicly funded project-based posts, including posts that Wessex Museums funds in the partner museums. So their work was carrying on, but in a lot of cases, they were being asked to fulfill kind of operational responsibilities for the museums because they had furloughed their core staff. So they were having to take on new roles and responsibilities as well. And then in terms of Wessex Museums, I mean, we found ourselves in quite a unique position because the Arts Council came out hugely supportive, not only securing our existing funding envelope for the consortium, but actually extending our programme by a further year. So they've extended our funding now till the end of March 2023. So basically, we've got an additional £320,000 without even having to put in a funding application. I mean, it was absolutely extraordinary. We were ever so lucky. But what this meant is that myself and my team would continue to work throughout, and many of our museum colleagues who were here to support and help were furloughed or not at work or doing other things. So we really found ourselves in this space where how could we start to help them to do the things that they actually couldn't do now. Next slide, please, Sarah. So these are just, I can pretty much organize the way we supported the museums during lockdown into these 4 areas: money, people, communication, advocacy, and digital. Really one of the first things we did was just to be very clear that all of the funding that Wessex Museums had was secure, and that we would use that funding to secure the posts we fund in the partner museums, including for that additional year I mentioned a moment ago. So this was just to give the museums confidence of their budget positions in respect of Wessex Museums. We also eliminated any financial contributions that the partner museums make to the consortium for this financial year and next, just to give them a bit of breathing space. And our fundraising and development manager was literally flat out horizon scanning, finding opportunities for them to apply for, supporting them with applications. So she's been a busy bee for the last few months for sure. But what this period of time really re-emphasized for Wessex Museums Trust was this sort of key role that we play in supporting the museums. I mean, one of the things we held the key to was this peer-to-peer support network that we've created by working together. And we found a real sense of community developing around that, colleagues wanting to reach out to each other during lockdown, to share experience, to get new skills, help, how do I make a digital film or whatever. And we could provide some of that support. We also found that we could work in a much more agile way. So we were exploiting some new opportunities that were coming up. And we were doing stuff without having to rely on the resources or the expertise of the partner museums. And I've just got a couple of examples there on screen. The Twitter post is one of the community curator vlogs that our community curator, Sarah, who's there on the right, created during lockdown. So we fund Sarah's post, which works across Salisbury and Wiltshire Museum. And here she's having a peer-to-peer conversation with another colleague in Poole Museum about their experience of trying to engage with community audiences when they can't see community audiences. So it kind of exemplifies all the ways that we were trying to work and support during that time. And the YouTube snap on the right there is our Thomas Hardy film shorts, which was an opportunity that just sort of hit us and tapped into the zeitgeist of lockdown, where people were either not able to get out into the countryside or were reconnecting with the countryside in a way they hadn't before. And we have a major exhibition on the life and work of Thomas Hardy coming up in 2022. So we wanted to keep some engagement and momentum and build up to that going. So our marketing and digital officer came up with the idea of, why don't we just go and film some walks in the countryside and read Thomas Hardy over them. I mean, it's a very simple idea, but it's had amazing engagement. And it started with the team doing these films, and it's moved on now to guest contributors. Our biggest guest contributor being Lord Julian Fellows of Downton Abbey fame, who you might just see there in the top row. So considering our social media platforms were really in their infancy as Wessex Museums, this has really been a success for us and grown, and we're going to keep it going moving forward. Next slide, please, Sarah. So where are we at with reopening? Well, as of the 1st of August, 3 of our partner museums are open with a range of social distancing measures in place. Unfortunately, but not unexpectedly, visitor numbers are down from between about 70 and 90% of what the museums would normally expect at this time of year. So it's pretty serious. Dorset Museum, of course, as I said, is being rebuilt, so is closed to the public, but their site is open again, and I was thrilled to attend their topping out ceremony last week. So progress is being made, but their reopening has been put back by about 6 months. So serious there as well. In terms of where we stand with revenue losses and staff, we've had already 4 redundancies across the partnership, about 40% of staff still on furlough, and we're estimating current revenue losses in the region of £100,000 across the consortium, but that is growing every day. We've so far secured £29,000 in Arts Council emergency response funding for just one of our partners, but we have pending funding applications in that to the value of over £1 million. So it is quite serious, and the level of support needed is significant in a very uncertain future. Next slide, please, Sarah. So where are we really headed? I don't know. The big unknowns, I'm sure everyone can relate to this. Long-term revenue loss is very difficult to predict at the moment. We're in this weird situation where as long as the museums are open, they're actually losing money, because whilst, you know, people are coming through the door, a lot less people are coming through the door. And as well as that, revenue sales in terms of cafe spend, shop spend are down as well, and people still have to staff the building and they still have to turn on the lights. Alongside that, for Poole Museum, the local authorities' budget position is unknown at the moment. We know that BCP Council's had a huge hit, and how that shakes down for the museum will come to play next financial year, so they've got to wait ahead. I think for all of us in arts and culture, the future funding landscape, in fact, for all charities, I mean, who knows what it's going to look like now? It's been very COVID response focused, but, you know, how's it going to change? I mean, we are already experiencing reductions in corporate support, people giving less, people reducing their gifts or removing their gifts to the museums. And no doubt competition will be much harder for trusts and foundations. For Wessex Museums, the concern is, of course, the squeeze on the public purse and any threat to future Arts Council funding. I suppose the silver lining is that more people tend to play the lottery at times like this, so but there might be a bit of lottery funding about. The other big point for us is about audience engagement preferences. I mean, visitors are slowly returning, but we're not clear yet on how quite they're going to want to engage with our venues. And, you know, has the museum visit changed permanently? We just don't know at the moment. And if it has, then the museum's business models have to change permanently as well. I mean, I know Dorset Museum has already adjusted their business plan for their reopening, which will now be in February, to assume 50% less visitors than they had originally planned. And at that level, they can just about retain their staffing levels. So we hope it won't be any less than that. So we've got much more fragile museums in terms of their finances, and a threat to Wessex Museums in terms of future funding as well. So it is like knitting fog. Next slide, please, Sarah. So where are we going from here? Well, we very quickly tried to, in this knitting of fog, put together some sort of framework which we could work in as Wessex Museums to support our museums and just to clarify our work. So this is the framework. It's really about trying to reconnect visitors, get them back through the doors of the museums. And one of the ways we'll do that is through some really high quality programming. One example being the Thomas Hardy exhibition that I mentioned a moment ago. We're also going to focus much more on our local audiences, as they at the moment clearly are the bigger visitors. Normally it's a sort of 50-50 split between local and tourist visitors. So we're going to be working hard to reconnect with our local visitors through community engagement projects. And one of the things we're already doing is creating some videos with artists that encourage local communities to participate and engage with the collections, and that will hopefully spin out to community exhibitions and displays, both physical and digital. Which leads me on to the next point about digital engagement. So one of the things we've got coming up is a digital knowledge exchange across the partnership to try and capture all the learning we've had during this experience across our partner museums and identify where we need to build more skills and how we can grow our digital offer. And then the last point is really what Wessex Museums is all about. It is about supporting our museums and their future resilience. And one of the conversations that we're going to have going forward is about things like shared services. You know, instead of 4 marketing officers in the museums, could we get away with 1? Those sorts of tough conversations are no doubt coming. So finally, Sarah, if you wouldn't mind, the last slide I've got is I've sort of said everything I want to say about the organization and from the business perspective, but I just thought it's useful to give some personal reflections as a sort of director and what it's been like. I mean, it has been really, really tough. For a role that is about future planning, trying to plan at a time like this is impossible. And the stress and worry I have seen in my team and my colleagues, you know, and myself, I think, you know, we need to just all really support each other and recognize that. The other thing, we just don't know. I mean, we still don't know what's going to happen next and what things will ultimately be like. Will our organization survive? It's a bit scary out there. But it's taught me to sort of be more flexible in the way I work and be more agile, which is my next point. I think, you know, things that would have taken us ages in the past to do, we're now just getting on with and doing. And I think that's something quite exciting and positive for the organization. And then finally, keep the positives. So I'm going to leave it there because we do need to keep the positives. And for us, that's really been about sense of community that's grown around Wessex Museums, our growing digital profile, which I've talked a lot about, and a sense of growing independence for us as well, occupying a new space where we can still support the museums, but actually we cannot rely on them so heavily as well. So I think there's some really exciting things for us going forward as well. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. That was great. Thanks for being so candid. Thanks for ending on a positive note. I think that's what we've all felt. We've all had ups and downs through this whole period, and you know, some days it's harder to be positive than others. But yes, I think in this particular sector, it is about flexing and being agile and looking at the things that have worked. And it's interesting you saying, I've heard so many examples of people who said, oh, we had a 12-month or an 18-month program to introduce this new app or whatever it might be, and we turned it around in 2 months. So you can do things quickly if you really need to. So I'm going to be, I think we have got a question in the chat box, but we'll leave until afterwards. I'm going to come back now to Laura. Laura's talking without slides, which is absolutely fine, about her experience of, as I said earlier, I don't know if you all heard, but Laura joined just 4 days before the theatre, the Barbican was locked down. So she's had a very interesting 4 or 5 months, which she's about to tell us about now. Laura.
Yes, I'm just going to talk to you for 10 minutes or so.
Absolutely fine.
Completely fine. So yeah, my name's Laura Creefman. I am the CEO at the Barbican Theatre in Plymouth, and it's an organisation that's been going for 40 years and specialises in talent development for like 12 to 25-year-olds. When I interviewed for the job, we were an organisation turning over just under £1 million a year. We were relying on less than 27% subsidy from Arts Council and other funds and charitable trusts. We were running 2 venues, our own 144-seat space and another 344-seat space, where we were doing more commercial and larger scale co-productions, which were then starting to tour in the country, around the country. We were creating site-specific work, and we're doing pretty standard talent development work, so theatre, technical theatre, dance. I literally signed my contract on the 9th of March, on the Monday. I did 2 handover days on the Thursday and the Friday, saw 1 show in our building, and then we closed the building on the Monday. I was brought in by the board full-time straight away. I was only supposed to do 6 handover days whilst finishing off some projects in Estonia and another project in Berlin, and making, you know, a crane dance for 50,000 people at Glastonbury. You know, that was what was kind of my handover time. Was supposed to be a very classic mix of previous job to new job, and instead I was brought in full-time by the board on that Monday. I had a month with the exiting CEO, where she was handling all of the wrapping up of a previous activity, and hey, here's the future, was handed over to me. We furloughed our staff. We ended up at a point, there was a point from the beginning of May where my finance manager and myself were the only 2 people left unfurloughed, and we were basically doing 6 people's jobs, and we did that for 4 months until we hit a small point about 3 weeks ago, and we realized we just couldn't. So we're now back to part-time staff this month, and then our remaining staff are coming back full-time from September, which is a relief. We have had a 50% reduction in our turnover for this year, minimum. We have had to make about 270,000 pounds worth of cost saving measures, which meant closing and ending our relationship with the second venue that we ran, and having to close all of those co-productions down. I've had to run a full redundancy process. We've lost 2 of our full-time staff, which is a 30% reduction in my full-time staff within my capacity. My organisation, and we're such a small venue that it's really tricky to balance social distancing in our space. We're in an incredible old Methodist chapel, which was the Fisherman's Chapel. It's the most beautiful space. The acoustics are gorgeous. It's beautiful for live dance. It's beautifully raked. However, to run our youth activities going forward, we can only fit a maximum of 8 to 10 people on the theatre floor space, or maybe 20 people if then there are lecture seating. Our studio theatre means for like dance classes, we could hold about 2 people in there. So we have had a real interesting moment to go, cool, how do we start up again, having had to completely stop overnight? Personally, for me, surprisingly, this has been actually one of the most fascinating challenges. It's like so ludicrous. It's kind of amazing for all the wrong reasons. And I wasn't anticipating that. So we've just flip-sided everything we're doing as an organisation. We had a number of freelancers who were already contracted for the summer term who we couldn't furlough. And so we continued to run activity with our existing under 25s community, and actually that was really successful. It was a mix between YouTube tutorials that they got weekly emails about, and then they could feedback responses to, which we were responding to ourselves, so there was a feedback loop. It was Zoom classes once it became safe to do Zoom classes with young adults, and then a set of very structured facilitated groups working on different projects. We ended up with like 37,000 engagements on just those YouTube materials alone, which was really high. But what it created with that group of facilitators was a real ability with them to adapt between real life projects and online, and for us to really think about how we make very satisfying training opportunities around that. We've been running 6 projects over the summer. So from about July to the end of the summer, we would run 6 projects in the city at different levels of social distancing. The very first was an entirely remote-based, screen-based interaction. One of them is a what we're calling Cafe Acustica in an amphitheatre of a very localised community, which is only being advertised to the localised community. So we don't have more than 30 people a night, which is about starting to share music and song and story. So that's very localised. to creating work which starts online and then ends up out and about in the streets, and is, helps build that transition for our young people from feeling quite anxious or isolated to feeling comfortable at working in groups again and being outdoors and performing. The really interesting thing about that is also we've identified a group of young people for whom they will be continuing to shield, who are in our community, either for health complications or because of their own mental health and anxiety, or because of members of their family who are in still compromised positions. And so we've actually been working with one group in a really in-depth manner with facilitators, looking at how they choreograph and create their own new dance film, and how they choreograph together as a group and develop their creative voices, even if they're still working in isolation. So we've been quite proud of ourselves, because that's been done with just our little freelance hours and me and my finance manager and a day of somebody else, whilst also rapidly trying to figure out how on earth we're going to find the money to offset a 50% reduction in income and where and what we do. We are relaunching our young people's activities in September, probably the end of September, let's be honest. In a completely different way, because of making things COVID secure, to use the government's phrase. We have to go from being able to have between 25 and 30 people in a youth theatre group, in the largest ones, to 10 maximum. But to hold 10, we still need a space which is about 100 to 120 square metres. That's like the finding spaces that where we can do that, when most schools are no longer allowing after school clubs to happen because of their own concerns about their uses of their buildings and deep cleaning and such, is really fascinating. It's a challenge we're still trying to resolve. It means budget wise, I go from having 5 youth theatre groups to having 16 every week. The costs and overheads for practitioners and space are going to be a big impact on us, but we feel this is a real priority, because as well as those 16, we will have at least one online group continuing. And we think it's a priority because this is a community that has been without social groups and without that ability to be together, and with schools having to go back into probably a much harder line kind of approach to education, that we know that we're of value for these communities, and they really want to be back in the room with us, because we've been conducting surveys and looking at how that will work with them, and we have a youth council who we work with to look at how this develops. We also know that means they're going to get a higher quality of training and opportunity, and that's really exciting. You know, if you've got 10 in a group, the ability for people to excel is amplified, and it gives us the opportunity to offer very different types of training. So things are going to become much more project-based and much more hybrid, cross-pollination, which is what I love and is my background. So I'm very happy about this. But rather than it being traditional theatre or dance training, it will be character and combat. So you're looking at how characters fight, say. It will be text and music. So what does music bring to a live text and to stage plays, and how does that come together, and how do you think about that? And that's kind of like kids from the age of 12 getting the chance to think about that kind of cross-pollination of different creative forms. We've also said, if we can't have people in our building, we'll go to everyone else. We've just flip-sided. My team had an ability to deliver site-specific shows, as do I in my background for the last 10 years. And so we're just doing it. We are creating, we have designed what we're calling playground events, which are free or pay what you want events, which will happen twice a month in different parts of the city. We're targeting mostly areas of where we already work, but where there are really high levels of social economic deprivation. Plymouth is in the top 10%. It's got 2 of the top 3% boroughs of social deprivation, both of which we work extensively with. And we are looking at how we can encourage non-arts attendees and allow people to take a risk. But they're all designed for different levels of social distancing. So there's some grand planned ones that we will not be able to do until Plymouth is able to and is comfortable with, and we are comfortable with, having over 300 people in a space. Big dance-offs in the car parks, going to take a while. But things like back alley puppetry that use the access alleys that everyone has to put their bins in every night, which will be promenade shows which allow people to stand inside their own property at their back gates in their own existing social groups allow us to hit the ground running next month with pop-up events. So it's a really interesting challenge to us to think about how that allows us to reach audiences we don't normally reach, how we can do that in a more regular and risk-taking manner. Because why would you normally be able to commission a show which is back alley puppetry? You know, it allows us to take a much bigger risk about what we're doing and what the young people we're working with and what our audiences can encounter. We've got another one which will be a fish and chip shop stories. So the stories last the amount of time it takes to cook your fish. Cod might take 6 minutes, haddock might take 8 minutes. Who knows? That's how long your story will last. And we're interested in what that does as an economic model for us as well. If we build that appetite for risk taking, and what happens if an audience is able to pay what they can rather than being a set ticket price, what does that do about not only accessibility but also the sustainability of that as an economic model? And I should say that all our youth activity is £60 a year. So our youth activity doesn't wash our face, so to speak, but it is really primarily important to us about how we move forward. So we are lucky because we are a relatively small organisation, and unlike some of the big regional theatres, we always did stuff outside of our building anyway. So all we've done is go, cool, we're just going to do that more. And compared with where the skills we have in the team gives an ability to be very agile in Plymouth and to create lots of collaborations, which Plymouth is really open to. Plymouth as a city has used this opportunity of COVID to completely change the way the cultural scene is working. I think it was already happening, but we're using it as an opportunity to really kickstart it. So everyone's being very collaborative, very collegiate, very transparent. There is really open discussions about how we share risk-taking models and how we get work back up on its feet again and how we work together. And so I feel like the city, the cultural scene in the city is going, cool, this is terrible, but how do we make sure that that range of activities works and we understand we're not in competition with each other? And that to me is very exciting. What does the future hold? Sorry, I've just gone rapid fire on all of this. That's probably a lot of information in a very short amount of time. What does the future hold? My hope is that by changing the way we work like this, so changing the opportunities for talent development and investing back into that Plymouth ecology and those under 25s, and by doing events around the city that create a different attitude and appetite for risk and for different kind of events to happen, that something extraordinary might come out of Plymouth in the next 18 months to 24 months. Like literally, if Crump and Footwork came from 2 different US cities, and if Drum and Bass came out of Bristol and Grimes come out of London, what is the potential to come out of Plymouth? If you give time for people to find their own creative voice, their own creative way of expressing, and you help them to find those side steps and that place where they really want to create and work, whether or not that's VJing because actually they never realize that they see sound, you know, and you don't necessarily know that unless you have a chance to try a workshop. Whatever it is, I think there could be something really exciting that happens as a consequence in the city, and a way that the way we adapt our space and the workshops and masterclasses we offer can help other organizations. I don't know if it's going to work. So I have probably approached this opportunity with COVID of going, go big or go bust. Because we could either close our doors and stop and just hunker down, or we can close our doors and use our team's energy to flip side that the other way. And luckily, my team have bought into this because there was one moment where there was definitely, when Christina said about some of these strange moments, there was a moment about 3 months in where I was in this room, which feels like a Groundhog Day, by the way, where I definitely felt like I was running an imaginary organization with an imaginary team in an imaginary city from my spare bedroom, going, that is not the role I thought I was taking. But I think unless you take the risks, and I think the organizations that are going to survive are those who understand their core values at their heart. Our stuff was always about being present and developing new voices and creating opportunities for those voices to be heard. And so we're just really focusing on that and using it as an opportunity to break a lot of inherited models. But as I said, I don't know if it's going to work. I think it will. My gut says it will. We're going to find out.
That's really inspiring, Laura. Thank you. In fact, Louise Mitchell, hello Louise, runs Bristol Music Trust, Colston Hall. So you know Louise. She said in the chat box, that's really inspiring, and I think it is. I think what both of you have demonstrated is that we have to think differently. That we cannot just, like you said, you could have just closed the doors and hunkered down. Christina, you could have just gone, oh, well, we're not going to do anything for the next 4 months, but you haven't. You've had to think about ways to continue to engage not just existing visitors and stakeholders, but to try and bring on new ones. There's a couple of very specific questions, but I just want to come to one from Muir McDonald, who's said, and I think it's for both of you, so perhaps Christina, if you could answer first. If there was one thing government could reasonably do, and I know government has given, I think it's about 157 billion worth of investment into arts and culture, which sounds a lot, but I'm sure it doesn't go very far. And you know, who's qualified for it and who hasn't. So Muir says, you know, if there was one thing government could reasonably do over and above that, I think, and that the IoD or that people could lobby for, what would you wish for? So Christina, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. And I definitely,
Jeannie's bottle.
I definitely don't want to sound like the broken record here, but I mean, it really does come down to money, very much. But I think what I'd like to see, and I think Laura's illustrated it beautifully in what she said, is that the government recognizes the economic contribution that arts and cultural and heritage make in this country, and that therefore it is, you know, absolutely essential to keep it going, and it is worthy of public funding. And I think they've gone some way towards that at the moment, but also that the investment is targeted to exactly the sort of innovation and agile working and you know, new business models that Laura's been outlining, and that our museums are having to start looking at long and hard, rather than, you know, propping up I don't know, you know, the old models. I think, you know, we need to go back to things like seed funding that allow people to take risks. We need to go back to a place where we can write funding applications for things that, you know, we don't know what the outcome is going to be, but we want to try something. And instead of defining it all before we even start. So I think, yes, it's still money, but I'd just like to see it coming at a different angle, really, with a recognition of the creativity and innovation that exists in this sector.
Laura, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I probably have 3 things that come to mind straight away. One is that we should be advocating for a universal basic income. It's absolutely absurd, the situation we're hitting into across the UK, but in like the cultural industry, 70% of the industry is freelancers. Those freelancers have almost invariably fallen through every net. Yes, there has been support in place, but I could riff for hours about this. But also with the increasing level of redundancies we're seeing across the UK, across all kinds of hospitality and industries, you know, you've got families with even within April and May was facing a £500 reduction in their monthly disposable income. £500, you know, you're going to this is going to get worse. And I think we should be thinking about that, because it goes around. And unless we can think about how we support that, we're going to be in a really bad place societally, let alone within the cultural industry. I also think that there is a really interesting thing that's interesting about who's lobbying the loudest and who's shouting the loudest, in the sense that the creative industries and the cultural sector actually brings in over, I think it's something like 10.8 billion, which is higher than the pub sector and higher than the football sector.
And the agriculture sector.
But the provisions and the support for us to reopen has not been anywhere near the same level. And the government's making continuous statements about, yeah, we can reopen. In theory, I can reopen my building, except for that caveat for stage 4 was specifically based on a set of pilots having been run. Those pilots have not finished being run yet. There's only been 2 or 3 so far in the music industry and across like West End shows. Both of the pilots to date have shown that to accommodate the levels of social distancing that the government want us to, it's not economically viable to open the buildings. And so there is a real difference between the bluster and the truth for most organisations. We've also got a really interesting thing coming forward, which is we're about to head into winter. And, you know, we've been really lucky to date in the weather that we've had throughout lockdown and over this summer. But I was drinking outside a public house on Saturday night, and it started to piss down with rain on us. You know, we're going to hit a depression that's going to go across. So imagine that across how we have to think about how our cultural sector works. We've got a major problem that's about to slap us in the face. And I know none of that is directly a solution, but I think what I'm advocating for is definitely the universal basic income. It's absolutely unacceptable that the government, that we're not moving in that direction. And that there should be a much greater priority about thinking about how our public and our shared social spaces are able to reopen, because they are our civic spaces. They are our civic spaces. They are where our young people hang out outside of hours. They are the permission for a safe space for some communities to go and do their homework. They are their only exit from an overcrowded house. They are for most people in the UK, they are our cathedrals. Whether or not that's museums or gyms or sports halls or community centres, you know, we are at the moment not realising the social damage we're doing with these being closed. I'm going to get off my soapbox now.
That's all right. Andrew Main, it's got a couple of quite specific questions. One for you, Christina. How are you making up for the 6-month delay on the Dorset Museum? Is this straining the funding plan, and can you complete the work to the standards you wanted to? I think you might have covered a bit of that off earlier in your presentation. And then there's a specific question for you, Laura, which I'll come back to in a second. But do you want to answer Andrew's question about Dorset?
Sure. Yes, so it is having a strain on the funding plan, absolutely. And Dorset, I mentioned the £1 million worth of current pending funding applications we have in. Well, a big chunk of that is Dorset Museum capital. So, I mean, they were hit by 2 issues. So one was COVID, but before that we had 3 major storms in West Dorset over the winter, when they had a massive crane up the centre of Dorchester, which they then couldn't operate because of the wind. So it has, you know, basically sledgehammer a huge hole in their redevelopment. And it got so bad in the early stages of lockdown, there were questions being raised about, do you really need to finish that gallery? You know, it was getting that serious. So yes, so we're hopeful that they will see success with these funding applications. The majority of those are with National Lottery Heritage Fund, which are their major funders. And I think, again, they have been quite supportive and they realise the issues there. And I think, you know, there's a sense they really want to see these projects through that are already, you know, on site through to completion. The other thing Dorset Museum have done, as I already mentioned, is they've had to look at reductions in their business plan around their numbers. So they've reduced their visitor predictions down by 50% in their business plan and adjusted all of their income levels to that. And literally they will just be able to maintain their staffing levels. So if it drops below that, then it will lead to redundancies. So it is a bit of a wait and see, but we're hopeful that they're going to finish that building and be open in February. And I absolutely support what Laura just said about the museums being civic social spaces, and we need to make sure they're open again.
Thank you. Andrew's second specific question to you, Laura. how mobile are you and your group? Could you get as far as Tavistock for collaborative projects?
Hi. Yes, we will be able to. At the moment, we're focusing in a very localized way, and we're looking at what we have to put in place at each different levels of social distancing and within the risk mitigation, and how we think about using all of our theatre equipment with that. But we are actually, as part of the young people that we're training up, we have a group of people who are interested in becoming project managers and event managers and fixers and lighting designers and sound engineers, and so we're looking about whether or not we can support them to make a micro SME themselves that then allows them to create a touring production facility that can just rock up. So a bit like the simplest version would be a curtain cider. So when you turn up to very small little pop-up festivals and they have the curtain cider with the entire sound system and the band on stage, and that's just parked up, that would be the simplest way to think about it. But looking at how that is supported with a surrounding collaborative and events production management model. With COVID, I don't think we're going to be putting that on its feet for probably about another 6 months. But I think with the larger projects we've got running, we've got planned for coming out the other side of this financial year. As we build up our audiences, we're planning some very large site-specific productions. And I think as we hit to those, we will then have that team in a position where they have the confidence to then be working in other areas in the peninsula. So yes, absolutely. But I think we've got 2 steps before we get there.
Andrew, does that answer your question? Did you have something specific in mind? I don't know if Andrew.
Yeah, that's where I was looking for the unmute. Wearing 2 hats here, one of which is I'm in the middle of trying to complete a project, which is national lottery funding in Tavistock for the Guildhall. And yes, we've got a very similar problem in that we're running out of money, and because of overruns as a result of the project, and the scaffolding stayed up for an extra 3 months, and so we suddenly got a very large scaffolding bill that's not in the budget, etc. But at the end of it, we end up with the Guildhall, which is a natural little theatre, and because it's an old magistrates' court in it, with the cells underneath and all sorts of space that could be used quite imaginatively for small performing arts groups, which is obviously one of the interests. And one of the other parts to me is I'm the governor of Mount Kelly. So we have a school which won Choir of the Year last year, Schools Choir of the Year, and very vibrant arts side. And we like doing things in the community, and can we support what Laura's trying to do? This area is, as Laura will know, we've lost our main sports centre in Plymouth because of the state of it, and so the school has ended up. We've got 13 school swim teams, swim teams from the region that we're housing, and we're doing a lot of work in the region to try and keep things going through a very difficult period.
Well, hopefully, Andrew, you and Laura might be able to hook up
I think we might offline have a chat.
Yeah,
it's not down to me, but I'm seeing the headmaster and
wonderful
on Friday,
wonderful.
So I can have a chat with him.
I'm going to take one more question from Muir, and then do a little wrap up. Muir, Laura, this is also for you. What an amazing story of innovation and agility. Do you see performing arts continue to offer these new performances and continuing to retain the new audiences when things are more normal again? And actually, that's probably relevant to both of you. And I think you both said that actually what is going to be normal? Are we ever going to go back to the traditional visit to the museum and the traditional visit to the theatre? Or is this going to be, a watershed moment for us in terms of arts and culture?
So
Either one of you.
there's some really interesting thought leadership around this that's coming out, and I think it's going to I think the landscape going forward is tricky. So one of the really interesting things is that after Novichok in Salisbury, it took them 9 months for their audiences to return. And that was the audiences to rebuild their sense of being able to take that risk and their comfort of being there. So there is, I think, a much greater delay than in some of our social appetites to things that's going to take time. I think there is an opportunity to be doing things differently. I don't necessarily think, I think there's often a lot of barriers inadvertently in around a lot of our organisations. Not all, that's not a blanket statement at all. And I think there is an opportunity here for long-term changes in how we think about where and how and what has cultural value, and culture with a small c rather than capital C. So I think there's been a huge amount of work that's been happening across the UK over the last 10-15 years around this, and I think a lot of it's going to bed in. I think, however, it's not going to be online. I think there's a big difference between distribution models and recorded materials and some screen-based activity. But actually, as humans, and if we think about what we have all been personally doing during lockdown, we like things which are tangible and physical and real. You know, the conversations about craving physical contact, the conversations about how much everyone's been doing their gardening or the DIY or crafting or doing things, we like this. We like this tactility. We like being in the real world. That's why we find a lot of these boundaries with COVID really tricky. You know, that's why everyone in some way or another has broken the rules, whether or not that's an illicit hug with a parent or, you know, sitting in somebody's kitchen because you just needed to be in contact, have a sense of normality with somebody. And I think there is an interesting contradiction there, which is like, how do we support our most instinctive human nature, which is to gather and to commune and to share and to be in a tangible experience. So I don't know where that's all going to land. It's definitely not all going to land online, is my very, very fundamental understanding on this. And I think Christina will probably agree.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on a few things there. I mean, I think for the museum, what we've said all along, even through lockdown, is that I never want to try to replace the museum visit, you know, because it's a special experience. It's that, you know, social space. It's just so much more of a physical, visceral experience than I could ever try and recreate in some sort of digital format. So I think I agree, you have to look at the two quite differently. And I in answer to Mira's question, I think, yes, you know, we will never stop having museum visitors, but I do think what this whole thing is showing us from the museum sector certainly is we need to make that visit far more dynamic and engaging and accessible and inclusive and representative than it has been. And we can start and enhance some of that digitally, either before, after, or, you know, during the visit. So I think that's sort of the angle we're coming from. It's really interesting. We've had one of the opportunities that's come up for us during lockdown is we were approached by Bath University to take on some MA heritage students who would normally be doing a physical placement at a heritage site, to do digital placements. And it's been a great success for us. We've had them working on all sorts of things, but one of the things one of the students was looking at was digital exhibitions, and did a big consultation exercise, particularly with young people. And, you know, even young people who may think are not interested in museums are saying very clearly that they want to go see physical exhibitions. They don't want to just engage with digital exhibitions. So I think the evidence is out there. And I also just want to say something about Salisbury, because absolutely right, 9 months to recover from Novichok now hit again with COVID, but the good news, and some good news again, Salisbury Museum on their reopening weekend of the 1st of August had over 200 visitors, and a huge amount of donations. So I can see the love and support in that community, and that's probably built in part by what they've already been through. But also interesting, and again, Laura, you said something about this, the museum, instead of charging admission, did a pay what you think or suggested donation, if you like. And that made a huge difference, they feel, to, you know, just people being able to come in the door and pay a little or pay a lot. So yeah, just add that as well.
I'm conscious of time. We've got 5 minutes left, and so Kathy Lewis, if Laura, if you can answer succinctly. Her question is, she's taking away go big or go bust, which is great. Outside of the youth projects, are you looking at paid for virtual events to generate income? So there we go, just what you were saying there, Christina. When are we going to move away from this pay what you like, or it's free? Everything is very free at the moment. So yeah, are you looking at paid for virtual events?
We're not at the moment. We're looking at building the appetite and the interest and the market and how we reach those people. So we're going to be doing a lot of high quality masterclasses and workshops alongside of our youth training activity, which are going to be open to the wider Plymouth creative ecology. We're not charging for those initially because we want to build the appetite for wanting to engage with it and see who actually engages with it and how we need to market it and how we reach wider communities with it. And that's because we have some existing funding that we can use to subsidise that for the first year. However, we are looking at whether or not, as a result of the findings we get from it, that can become an income stream moving forward, and what the appetite is for that. I have spent my life working fusing movement and technology and music together. That's my previous job for the last 10 years. And I spent 10 years making things which are tangible and physical and real and don't involve screens. So I have a personal, probably quite high level dislike of things which come through a screen and or a flat surface. So I'm not personally advocating for us for creating interactive online shows, because I have been watching the ones which have hit the ground, and I've been watching how people are responding and the passivity of it and the isolatory nature that can be as part of it. And I'm not sure it quite works personally, but if it's what our young people wanted to create, then we would absolutely bring the team in to work with them on that. And I would say that we are looking at how they generate. One of the courses we're offering is how they generate their own online stories. So we are, and how they build their own podcasts as well. So we are covering it, but not necessarily on paid for virtual interactive shows.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, I'm going to wrap up now. We've had some great comments in the chat box. I think people have been very inspired by what they've heard from both of you today. Determination, positivity and creativity. So yes, some lovely comments there. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. I certainly have. Just before I ask you to give a little thank you in the chat box, and you're waving your hands. The next Tuesday at 2 is on the 1st of September, and that's when we're going to focus on the hospitality industry. We have Tessa Lidstone, who co-runs Boxy restaurant in Bristol. It's quite Bristol focused, but the issues are the same for everybody. And Griff Holland, who runs the healthy fast food chain Frisker. So that, again, we're going to look at how they are coping with social distancing and getting people back into their doors. And again, it would be interesting when the cold weather comes. So you were saying, Laura, you know, that is going to be a real challenge for our eating and drinking places. So that's the 1st of September. So thank you very much indeed to Christina and to Laura and to everybody who's joined us this afternoon. I've been really inspired by it. I hope you have too. And if you want to give a little clap in the box, that would be fantastic. Thank you everyone for joining, and we'll see you hopefully on the 1st of September.